Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This morning I'm looking at a book from Jordan Publishing that's come to us on employment law. Now, this is not the normal type of law book that you will see around. It's different. It's different for a couple of reasons. One is it's very readable, and secondly it hasn't got any case law really of any sort, any legal stuff as such, by reference to statutes and so forth. So in other words, it's very much a book, I think, for the layman. I'm very grateful that it's on the market. The title of the book is Employment Guide to Procedures. It's been written by a barrister called Simon Harding. And my wife Elizabeth and I looked at the book. We've had a chat about it because I've used this book when I've been seeing clients. I found it so helpful to talk about human resource issues in a much more non-legal sense, but at least at the same time having that backbone of the actual legal structure that you've got to have when you're employing staff or setting up businesses. So as I say, I thought this was a fascinating book to read. It's easy to read as well, that's another thing. We've given it a title, An Excellent Prime Statement for the Modern Entrepreneur Who Needs to Understand Current Employment Law and Procedures, and that's what the book is. It's only a light book, lovely nice blue cover, bluey green cover there, turquoise, not sure what the colour really is, but there's the spine, and there's a bit about the book and Simon Harding's name at the back. There's a little index dealing with all the things you might be looking for, disability, disciplinary, all the stuff. Excellent examples at the back, which help you with things like consultancy agreements, a staff handbook, I'll mention this in a few minutes, and things like the main terms and conditions of a contract. And then right at the back you've got, that's the appendix, which is examples of documentation. Then you've also got some useful further information and considerations. So we go to the front of the book, there's the front page there. Then there's a nice dedication to Juliet Elizabeth Harding there, and some detail about the book. It's available also as purely, I think at the moment, just as a book, and it's part of the Jordan's Business Startup Pack that was originally introduced. I'll mention that again in a minute. There's the preface, very little actually in the preface itself. Then the chapter headings, I shall be mentioning those a little bit later on. You can see the chapters that they go into. Right at the end, compromise agreements rather, right at the end, chapter 13, and final considerations, then the appendices. And of course the important thing here is the introduction. Why do we have this book in the first place? Well, we'll explain it, because the book, if you look at it, there are no footnotes. There is paragraph numbering to find things, but the question really is, what value is this book? Well, there's a lot of value to it for a person who probably doesn't have much of an understanding of law, certainly would rely on people like us as barristers and solicitors to give legal advice, but at the same time this will point people in the right direction. It's, as I said, part of the excellent informative package of what is called the Jordan's Business Startup Pack, which was originally produced, and this, just the beginning of it was actually in the pack. And obviously it's become a short guide since then to employment law for small business, and Jordan's have now developed that pack into a fully-fledged book entitled The Employment Guide to Procedures, and it's much more of a common sense management tool than a law book. Let me just remind you, it's a paperback. It runs to 350 odd pages in total, and you've got an awful lot of real common sense information. There are some subheads, but generally speaking there are relatively short paragraphs, and Simon puts across, I think, the very important points very succinctly. We feel that the guide should be required reading for anyone who has set up a company or is proposing to set up a company and intends to employ staff with all the responsibilities that go with it. And Harding states that the purpose of the guide is to explain that in reality employment law is your friend. That is exactly, of course, what it is. The fact is that employment law, if used properly, will be a friend because it sets out the boundaries. And in its simplest form between yourself and all the other people you're dealing with, i.e. the boss, the staff and all the other people involved, health and safety, executive, everybody involved. So it gives you some idea of what you can do. It's a highly readable book. It's a piece of advice, an advice statement, as a primer with no case law or pesky statutes to be bothered with. So the entrepreneur can feel a bit less constrained by the pomposity of the law, therefore more relaxed about the business advice which Harding actually gives us. And potential employers must have what Harding terms robust systems and procedures in place and the right paper trail. That's the dreaded paperwork and attention to detail, the written detail, which you've got to have today, plus the correct documents. And the budding business person then stands a much better chance of successfully resisting some of the more spurious employment tribunal claims which are put forward, and other equally unmeritorious claims which we see so frequently because employers have not actually followed a proper guided plan. And I think it's very important to bear this in mind, because the bottom line on a lot of this is that you do get a lot of unmeritorious claims being made, and it does take up a huge amount of time, and it can actually break small businesses if you're not careful. You must know where you're going with your business. Harding's guide, therefore, explains how employment law can be used to your company's advantage. Now, I think, frankly, therefore, there's a bit of strategy involved in this. He tackles his task by clearly stating what companies need to know, and in many cases why they need to know it, which does, of course, help the inquiring mind. The book achieves the following basic requirements of setting up a 21st century business by answering these sorts of questions. What systems and procedures do you need? Why do you need them, and what can sometimes go wrong if you don't have them in place? There are other questions covered which are mentioned again on the back of the book and in the blurb everywhere. How to recruit fairly, the different forms of employment relationship you may have with your staff, job descriptions, staff handbooks, most important staff handbooks. I can't stress that because many companies don't seem to have them. They are the basic core of what you can and can't do, of course. Personnel, that's human resources files, all the issues about availability, disclosure, data protection, all of that stuff, of course, you've got to think about. Then you've got things like tax and national insurance, and that's just to name but a few of the areas. And also you've got things like how employees can sue you in a tribunal. Personal injury claims, for instance, and data protection infringement claims. So there's a lot to think about, and the book actually brings it all together, I think, quite neatly. Now, other relevant issues covered here are how to protect your intellectual property from theft by employees, and the importance of the need to have systems and practices in place from the start, which of course is the key. And the guide also includes the following at the back of the book, things like template documents providing guidance on what should be contained in an employment contract, those are the appendices specifically, terms and conditions of employment, the staff handbook, what should be in it, plus samples of temporary worker agreements and consultancy agreements. Now, a lot of this will be common sense, but one of the things I found, I've used some of the templates, and they work. The thing is, they ask the questions as a form of checklist, if you like, as to what you've got to ask and what you've got to consider. And that information is a great management tool. It's also legally helpful because it makes you have that logical approach as to how you're going to go about setting up your own business, employing people and so forth. Let me conclude by saying this. This is all presented in an accessible, chatty and easy to digest way with no real jargon, which most businesses really want to do without because they want to just get on with the competition and what they have to deal with. The act of competition's not changed, of course, but the procedures certainly have, and you need to know about them to survive. Harding says at the beginning, and the first chapter, a stitch in time saves 9. This then is his survival guide to prevent the 8 additional stitches being needed. And thank you very much, Simon. I think it's a first-class book. I'm very pleased with it. I'm sure it will be around with us for a long time. There's the front, the side and then the back. I'm sure it will be with us for a very long time. And for instance, you've got right in the middle the disciplinary process. Again, there are some areas in this book which you really don't want to think about. Disciplinary procedures, misconduct, areas you don't really want to talk about at all, because what you want to do is get on and make a success of your business. The thing is, you've got to have some idea of the procedures you must employ in this day and age within employment law requirements to make sure that you are as protected as possible from any little nasties that can possibly come your way. I'd like to thank Jordan's and Simon Harding very much for this book. I think it's essential for anybody who's setting up a business who's not particularly cognizant of what's needed, and I think this will give them a lot of perhaps strength, a bit of confidence about what they're doing, because they'll realise what they're doing people have already been through and they know exactly what the pitfalls can be. Thank you to all concerned anyway. Bye bye.